Hello, my name is Mike Hayes. I'm editor of Construction Europe magazine. Earlier, I spoke to Chris Sleight, managing director of Off-Highway Research, a company which analyzes the global construction equipment market. And I asked Chris about their recently published report on Brexit, what its implications might be as it looks today and as it might finally look for the European construction industry. So, Chris, we're talking about Brexit, which is an extremely complicated and divisive subject. Obviously, as things stand, we don't know for sure which way, what Brexit will look like when we finally have it. But if we stick to what we do know, as things stand, I'd like to ask you first of all, if, for example, I'm an OEM operating in Europe, looking to sell equipment into the UK, what are the implications of Brexit as it stands today?
Yes, thank you, Mike. You're quite right to say that we don't fully understand what Brexit will look like. It's still being negotiated as we speak, and there is significant confusion about it. But I think the important point to make is that while we don't know all the details, and particularly whether there'll be a free trade agreement in place between the UK and the EU, there is actually quite a lot which we do know about Brexit. And a lot of the things which OEMs will have to pay attention to are quite well known. I think the things that are best understood on a practical level, it's very clear that the UK will be outside both the EU single market and the customs union when it leaves. So that means there are going to be customs declarations required for goods coming back and forth between the UK and the EU. That's something which manufacturers may well be used to if they're selling their products in other countries where there isn't a free trade agreement in place or where there isn't a sort of simplified customs procedure in place. But if manufacturers have just done business between the UK and the EU before, that's a brave new world that they're going to have to deal with. Customs declarations are quite complicated. They're probably best handled by a customs agent, but that's just one of the bits of organisation and bureaucracy that companies are going to have to get in place in order to keep functioning on January the 1st when the transition period ends.
And if we look at the situation in reverse, is it a simple case of reversing it for a UK manufacturer who's looking to ship equipment, components, materials to Europe, or is it more complicated than that?
It is more or less the situation in reverse. The same sort of things apply. Customs declarations will have to be filled in for each shipment. And one of the other important things is that when the UK was in the EU and the situation now in the transition period is that there was no need to have an importer in the EU for a UK-based manufacturer. They were part of the EU, so there wasn't any importing going on. So in both cases, for trade in both directions, an importer is going to have to be appointed by OEMs, or indeed anyone in the supply chain sending physical goods.
Now, you go into this in some great detail in the report which you recently published. Now, as part of that, I understand there is going to be a major issue with the historic CE mark that equipment has been carrying for years in Europe.
Yeah, it's a very complicated area, but there are a lot of issues around the conformity and labelling of products. So what that means in the construction equipment industry is the CE mark, which we're quite familiar with. That's a mark or a plate which is placed on construction machines, which shows that it conforms to all the necessary health and safety regulations which apply in the EU. And actually in the case of the CE mark, that's the European Free Trade Area, and I also believe Turkey now as well. So that's some fairly basic safety things, but it also encompasses things like noise and engine emissions, so the forthcoming stage 5 regulations. And stage 5 will apply in the UK. That's an important point to note. So when Brexit finally takes effect, the UK will no longer operate as part of the European Union, and there'll be a different marking regime in place. And what is going to replace the CE mark in Great Britain, which is to say England, Scotland and Wales, is something called the UK CA mark, the UK Conformity Assessed mark. There has been a change very recently in this, and for the first year after transition, so basically for 2021, the CE mark will still be acceptable in the UK as long as the technical requirements in the UK and the EU remain the same. So that's sort of a bit of a stay of execution for manufacturers because obviously there is quite a lot of practicalities around, you know, a product that's previously assessed to one thing and marked in one way, to get that assessed potentially in a slightly different way, and to get a new conformity mark on it takes time. So there's a stay of execution there. There are a few caveats to that, but basically the CE mark will still apply. After that, anyone who wants to put a machine on the market in Great Britain will have to have the UK CA mark on their product, and it will have to be assessed and certified in that way. Now, there's no reason why a machine can't have two different marks on it as long as it meets both requirements. So a machine can have a UK CA and a CE mark. And that sounds like it's something that's going to be advisable, because if a machine just had a UK CA mark, it could only be placed on the market in Great Britain. And if the owner then wanted to sell it somewhere else, it would the EU wouldn't be a viable market to sell that machine on. It may well meet the requirements of a CE mark, but if it hasn't got a CE mark, it can't be used in those territories. So that's one thing to bear in mind. There is a follow-on to this, which, if you're not confused already, Mike, I'm sure you will be by the end of this. The way the way Brexit is being interpreted is that when the UK leaves at the end, well, the UK has left the EU, when the transition period ends on the 1st of January, in some ways it will be as if the UK was never a member of the European Union. That's important because when you place a machine on the EU market, it has to meet the requirements that are in place, the CE mark requirements on that date. So that's why we have machines that can be quite old, and they just meet the requirements for engine emissions and noise and whatever it might be when they were put on the market. So that's fine. There's no need to keep updating the machine with a new engine when stage 4 and stage 5 comes in. People understand that. What will happen now is, because it's almost as if the UK was never in the EU, then machines that are in use in the country will be deemed to have never been placed on the EU market. So that means that, Mike, say you have your excavator that you bought 10 years ago and it had a stage 3B engine in, you know, that's fine. And today, towards the end of 2020, you could sell that in the EU. No problem. It's been on the EU market for 10 years. It met the requirements when it came onto market. However, if you want to sell that on January the 1st next year, that machine will now be deemed not to have been placed on the EU market. So, I mean, you effectively can't sell it. You could potentially have a look at the engine and bring it up to stage 4, stage 5 requirements, whatever's required, but that's probably going to be quite expensive and not very practical. So yes, if you're an owner of a big fleet of equipment which operates in the UK and your disposal route has been to sell it somewhere else in the EU, you could potentially have quite a big problem on your hands. The question this raises is, how on earth do you enforce it? Because there's no sort of registry of construction equipment. It's not really tracked around where it's working in the EU. So there's the question of whether you as the seller would have to prove that It had been used somewhere in the EU 27 in its life. I'm not sure how you do that, whether you take your excavator to Spain and show it making sandcastles on the beach. How you would prove that, I don't know. But it's a question of whether the onus is on you or whether the onus would be on customs officials to say that they have to prove it hasn't been used in the EU. So that's a question, and it's not really one that there's a ready answer for, and it's really not clear how that will work in practice. But it is a very, very worrying situation that all the fleet of equipment which is active in the UK, probably several 100,000 construction machines, now is not, potentially can't be sold as used equipment anywhere in the European Union. It's saleable as it has been in other parts of the world. That doesn't really change, but there's obviously a big market for used equipment that is potentially closed off by this legal change.
That sounds to me like it could also have massive implications for the rental market.
Yes, potentially. I mean, anyone who operates a big fleet of equipment, if there are international contractors that have fleets of machines that move around Europe, where does it leave them? Can they, if they take a machine from a job in the UK and suddenly it's needed in France, can they do that? What sort of proof do they have to provide? And as you say, rental companies, if there are rental companies that have a pan-European fleet, in fairness, there aren't that many rental companies that operate that widely around Europe, but there are one or two. But also, again, rental companies who may wish to dispose of a UK fleet, and if they've traditionally sold those machines somewhere else in the European Union, they could potentially have a problem on their hands.
That is a seriously thorny issue, leading me on to perhaps an even thornier one. Is there mention made in your new report about the situation in Northern Ireland and how Brexit could affect the situation there as it stands?
Yeah, yes, there is. Again, it's, I think backtracking, I should say that the situation with all of these things around Brexit this is what the situation is and how we understand it here in mid-September 2020. It has the potential to change very quickly, and it may well change very quickly, and that certainly applies to Northern Ireland. The situation with Northern Ireland is in the law that was passed in the UK for us to leave the EU. There's something called the Northern Ireland Protocol, and what that does is, the concern was that as Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and the rest of the island of Ireland, which is to say the Republic of Ireland, remains an EU member state, that there would be some need for a border or some sort of checkpoint at the border of those two countries. There are a lot of issues around that. On a practical sense, is it really possible? And then it brings back a lot of the very bad memories of the troubles in Northern Ireland, which were finally put to bed in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement. One of the terms of that is that there must not be physical borders or physical checks between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So that's very understandable, and I don't think anyone would seriously disagree with that. But you do have to have a border somewhere. There does have to be some sort of check. So what the Northern Ireland Protocol does is it says, from the point of view of traded goods, from the point of view of tariffs and customs checks, Northern Ireland will function as if it is still part of an EU member state. So because of that, there's no issue about goods crossing the border from the Republic to Northern Ireland. That's fine, they just operate in the same way. And that's sort of okay, you could maybe see that working, but at the same time, Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and businesses in Northern Ireland have been promised what's the buzzword is unfettered access to the markets in Great Britain. and that is taken to mean that there won't be extra customs formalities and there won't be physical checks on goods coming from Northern Ireland across to Great Britain, which is England, Scotland and Wales. So, I mean, that's all fine. You know, it sounds like a good idea on a piece of paper. How you actually implement that, how you actually have a border without border checks in the Irish Sea, and some of the issues around how products are labelled, going back to the CE mark and the UK CA mark, get very, very complicated very quickly. And frankly, it isn't fully resolved yet. There are some areas where there's a protocol in place, but I would say it is a thorny issue, and it's not one that's very easy to resolve because there are obvious inherent contradictions in it.
Off-highway research's bread and butter is analysis of the construction equipment sales market. Now, ultimately, how do you think Brexit is going to affect the UK market for construction equipment sales?
Again, and with all the forecasters' caveats in place, it's very difficult to say because we don't really know what Brexit will look like. There's obviously a very, very significant difference between some sort of trade agreement being agreed and the UK leaving without a deal, which, you know, we feel would be absolutely disastrous for the UK economy, to have the worst possible trading relationship with our biggest trading partners is clearly going to be damaging. So it is a tough one to call because we don't know what the relationship will be. And it is also a tough one to call because at the moment, like pretty much every other equipment market in the world, the UK market is reeling from the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, the lockdown that went with it, and the attempts for the country to kind of get back to normal and some more normal functioning economic activity. So having said all that, it's all tangled up in one big soup, I would say. But we feel that any sort of Brexit has a negative impact on the construction equipment market. We don't really see anything which will make the economy better on January the 1st, 2021. But we obviously see a lot of negatives with it being more difficult to trade with the EU, and with some of the things that have gone along with Brexit, the flight of jobs and the flight of investment. So we see any Brexit as having a negative impact. There are people who believe that long-term Brexit is good and that free from the restraint of operating within the EU, the UK can find a new and more dynamic position in the world. If that is the case, and if that comes to pass, then good. But I think no one would seriously argue that that's going to happen on January the 1st, 2021. That's a project that takes years, if not decades, to put into place. So what I'm saying in an extremely roundabout way is that we think the UK and indeed the Irish market will fall next year because the two are quite closely intertwined. The forecast that we have in this report and what we believe is that the UK construction equipment market will fall by 36% in 2020. And we think that's a combination of the uncertainty leading up to Brexit and people not wishing to invest, and also obviously the impacts of the pandemic. So all those things combining this year for a 36% decline, which is the biggest decline of any equipment market in Western Europe this year. Like most other countries, we do expect there to be a bounce back in 2021. In fact, that bounce back is probably happening right now in the second half of the year. But we expect that to be a little modest for the UK. And really, we expect it to be 3 to 4 years before the UK market comes back to, really anything remotely resembling the kind of levels that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years here in the UK.
Wonderful news, Chris. That being the case, flipping it, what do you think the situation will be? What will the repercussions be for the market in Europe, given that the UK is potentially in the doldrums for the next year or two at least?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right to raise that, because trade is absolutely a two-way street, and if the UK market is down, then clearly it's bad news for companies in the EU which supply into the UK. The UK is a very big manufacturer of construction equipment. In the products that we look at and the way we measure the market, it is the biggest producer of construction equipment in Europe in volume terms. Having said that, the UK market, if you look at all the machines that are sold here in a year and where they're manufactured, only about 30% of the construction equipment sold in the UK is made in the UK. And actually a bigger supplier to the UK, with about a 40 to 41% share of the market, is the EU 27. So it does emphasise the point that if the UK market falls, yes, it's bad for the UK industry, but it will also have an impact on manufacturers elsewhere in Europe. You can look at the sums and you can sort of say, okay, maybe the impact is going to be more keenly felt by UK manufacturers because there are fewer of them and they're focused in some cases very much on the UK market. And for others in the EU, they have a broader market to fall back on. But clearly a steep fall in the UK market is pretty much bad news for anyone who sells construction equipment, because all the suppliers are active here in the UK. So it has an impact for manufacturers in the rest of the EU and also in Asia. Japan and Korea are big suppliers of excavators and mini excavators to the UK market.
And Chris, one thing that we do know is that we'll be operating outside of the common agricultural policy. What effect do you think that will have, and what implications will that have on the UK and European markets?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike, and that's one of the few things that's been clear about Brexit right from the start, is that we would leave the pan-European agricultural subsidy system. This is a difficult one again, and a concerning one, I would say, for not only the agricultural sector, but also for equipment suppliers. So the Common Agricultural Policy is a pretty expensive thing to administer. The figures that we found from the UK ministry responsible for administering it is that in 2018, almost £3.5 billion were distributed to farmers in the form of subsidies, the majority of which came from European funds. So what the UK government said at the start of the year is they made it very clear the timescale over which the replacement UK scheme will be phased out, and that'll be phased out over 6 to 7 years once the transition period is over. So it will be replaced by a different UK scheme that will kind of look at different benchmarks and award funding to farmers based on things like environmental performance. So while the UK government has been very clear about how quickly the money will go, it's not really been very clear about how much money will be in the new scheme, exactly how it will be awarded, and all those sort of things. So, not wishing to appear cynical, but, I would be quite prepared to bet that the amount of money that any given farm gets post-transition period will be less than it gets under the Common Agricultural Policy. I think it's probably fairly likely that the UK scheme will be a little bit delayed and be debated. And of course, as a national government can do more or less what it likes with subsidies, whereas at an EU level, it's a pretty slow-moving oil tanker of a policy that doesn't really change a lot year to year. So with all the pressures on public finance now, I can see farmers getting a rawer deal than they were used to. Why is that important to the construction equipment world? Well, first of all, most of those construction equipment makers, or many of them, make tractors as well. The UK market for tractors over the last 10 years has been between about 12,000 and 14,500 machines per year. So there's clearly going to be less money around to spend on those types of machines. But in addition to that, quite a few of the machines that we think of as construction machines are sold to agriculture. We did a little exercise, you can read the details in the reports, but it's about 4,000 machines a year, so it's 10 to 15% of construction equipment, or so-called construction equipment, is sold to agriculture. That's particularly things like telescopic handlers, skid steer loaders, and generally the smaller types of equipment. So again, with farms just having less money, we see that part of the so-called construction equipment market being imperiled.
Okay. Chris, thank you very much. Thanks for talking to me. Sorry it's all doom and gloom, but always good to talk to you.
My pleasure, Mike.